What is up, everybody? Welcome into Shout, a Buffalo football podcast on this Tuesday, September 6th. Week 2 is here. Bills versus Jets. There's a bunch to get into. My guy, Antwan Staley from the New York Daily News, kind enough to give us a few minutes as we look ahead to the big matchup this weekend. What's up, buddy?
Hey, I'm good. How you doing? Coming off that exciting win on Sunday.
That was an intense game as the entire row of reporters is clicking away at their computers trying to change things at the last second, because that was, it looked like it was over 40-25 with under 4 to go. And then obviously they figure things out on this show today. This is an exciting show because so many times over the last couple of years, there's been so much turmoil, changeover, roster flipping in New York. And now you look at the Jets and they're a really exciting team to kind of dive into, a completely new look with Justin Fields back there. I think their offensive line looks a lot better when you get into all of that. And obviously that defense still, especially on the front, very formidable. I wanted to start off with you though on Fields, because if you think about coming into the season, even like at the start of training camp, I feel like people were not super high on this offense and the potential. And over the course of camp, you've watched him up close and personal preseason. And then he comes out in the opener and I thought really had a command of this offense. They obviously got their running game. He is a weapon in that part of things as well. Did that meet or exceed expectations what Fields did in week 1?
Oh, it exceeded it. I thought their offense was tremendous. I mean, I thought, looking at the training camp in the preseason, like Justin Fields was very uneven. Like it would be times where he had really good practices, but it'd be times where he's really struggled. And I think that's been kind of like the tell of his career, whereas like he been consistent enough as a passer. That's why, Bears decided to move on, draft Caleb Williams. That's why, the Steelers, they had some interest with Justin Fields, but they were not going to pay him $30 million guaranteed like the Jets were. So I think they allowed him just to go there, and they felt like they were getting an upgrade with Aaron Rodgers, which they may or may not be. I mean, we'll have to see how that, how it plays out. But, I think what Justin did, not only just using his legs to, create touchdowns and explosive plays there, but I think, ultimately, like he was efficient, like he was throwing the ball really well, finding his receivers, in the passing game there, relied a lot on Garrett Wilson and also the running game too, as well, with Breece Hall too, and also Braylon Allen. So, yeah, I definitely think, it's a good, first step a little bit. Obviously you want the win, but, I think the Jets defense was a really, good surprise against the Steelers there, as opposed to their defense, which I thought was supposed to be a strong suit, but it definitely was not, at least not in week 1.
We're going to get into all three levels of that defense, especially in the back end where I feel like there's the most questions outside of Sauce Gardner. But I want to spend a few more on Fields here, because I think what my concern with him, as the tape piles up over the next couple of weeks, is he takes chances. And I think there was like 3 or 4 turnover worthy throws where if a couple of those balls are picked off, then you're talking about a completely different game and scenario and what kind of spot that then puts the offense in. Because you mentioned it, the run game looks so good, but if you're turning the ball over, it's hard to really rely on that run game and kind of keep it going throughout the game. So how much has that been a storyline with Fields too, is like, maybe taking a sack as opposed to trying to fit it into a tight window. And I'm sure that'll improve as well. And you got some talent with Garrett Wilson that you almost want to force the ball to at times. But what have you seen from him, especially in the preseason and training camp, in terms of ball security?
Well, I think ball security, I think he was pretty fine in that area. He did have a few turnovers in the preseason and training camp, but I think overall, like, he's been efficient taking care of the football. I think part of that what helps that is he's not really throwing the ball downfield a whole lot. Even against the Steelers, I think he had one pass over 20 yards. So I think he's been really just taking what the defense is giving him and not necessarily, relying on those big time throws down the field and just doing some dink and dump, maybe like 7-yard pass, maybe 10-yard pass, maybe a 15-yard out or whatever the case may be. So I think they want him to just, just play efficient. And then you also rely on that offensive line, which I think, has improved there. Obviously, the Elijah Vera Tucker injury was pretty big because I think he was their best offensive lineman. But now, you have a guy, Joe Tippmann, who can play center or guard. And I think a lot of people thought he would be a better guard in the league than he would be center. And I think that kind of translated a little bit on the field on Sunday. And you're able to put Josh Myers at center, who somebody he's familiar with. And also, they played in college together at Ohio State. So, yeah, I think they just want him. They're okay with, just him taking what the defense is giving them. But, as you alluded to, they just don't want him to, press and make those bad decisions.
I was really impressed with Armin Membu. And I remember talking to a few people during the draft process, maybe even you at one point, about the level of player that he could potentially be, even as an impact player as a rookie. And I think that just having that for Justin Fields on the right side, I believe he's playing next to Tippmann there at right guard.
Yes.
That is like a formidable side of the line that I think is going to really have. Those were the top two graded pass protectors in the opener. You could talk about Membu and what he means there and what you've seen so far. How big of a concern is Fashanu, who ended up giving up 6 pressures according to Pro Football Focus, had the 1 sack to Alex Highsmith? Is that an area of concern in the blind spot for Justin Fields?
I didn't think it would be heading into the game, but you played against TJ Watt. You got Cam Haywood. You talked about Highsmith too as well. Like the Steelers have a very formidable defensive line room, and I think Membu did a really good job. I mean, especially considering the circumstances where a lot of times Watt was over on that side, and then he was able to at least contain them enough where Justin Fields was able to get the ball out, or they were able to run past them there and create some plays that way. Fashanu. Yeah, it was definitely not good because ultimately, he gave up a ton of pressures. And, actually was one time where he allowed TJ Watt to just run free and it's pretty much, clobber Justin Fields there. And luckily Fields was okay. But yeah, you definitely don't want to see that. This is his going into really his first full year as a starter too at left tackle. If you remember correctly, he ended up taking over late last season for Tyron Smith, who ended up suffering an injury. So yeah, this is a young line on both sides. Both tackles are pretty young there. You like with the experience that you get in the middle there, but yeah, I think it's going to see some growing pains from both Membu and also Fashanu too, because they're just so young, and again, like they have some tough challenges coming up. Not only just the Bills there, but they got Tampa Bay, after that next week too, on week 3. The Dolphins, depending on what you think about them, they do have a formidable, pass rush too as well. So it doesn't get any easier for these guys either. But yeah, I expect it to be some bumps along the way.
You see Breece come out in the opener, averaging 5.6 per carry, and it takes you back to that spectacular, rookie season, then obviously into the second season where I think a lot of people thought this guy was going to be one of the top, runners in the league. Obviously, the injury was a bit of a setback. Was there excitement around what he can be, not just in the pass game, but in the run game, but in the pass game as well? And I mean, he looked like somebody that now going into this week against the Bills, coming off of what just happened against Derrick Henry in that run game for the Ravens. I mean, Breece Hall has to be one of the primary priorities for this Bills defense.
Yeah, I think not just him. I think Braylon Allen too, Isaiah Davis. They want to utilize their running backs sort of like the way that the Lions used theirs, especially when Aaron Glenn was there, where they relied on David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs too as well. They create some things in the running game too, and also maybe catch passes there out the backfield. Yeah, I think Breece looked like he was pre-ACL form, like you alluded to in his rookie year. Suffered that ACL injury in 22. Came back in 23, crazy enough, against the Bills on that crazy Monday night game with Aaron Rodgers. Ended up getting Dalvin Cook too as well. But yeah, he was their leading rusher. But it's just injuries have gotten in the way too. I think last year Aaron Rodgers being there, and he's not. Aaron Rodgers doesn't necessarily like to run. Even if you look at the game on Sunday, the Steelers didn't run the ball a ton. Aaron likes to throw the ball there, just does like a little, dink and dunks, and that's kind of like his short handoffs there, I guess, per se. But yeah, I think now that you got an emphasis on running the ball, and also they want to be physical. Like Aaron Glenn is a old school guy. I mean, his former coach was Bill Parcells. Former defensive coordinator was Bill Belichick. So, and understand that Dan Campbell as well, who he, was under with the Lions, they have a presence about running the football. They want to establish the run, and they feel like that's where it all starts from. And Breece Hall is definitely going to be a factor in that game in that way, and he's also going to be a factor in the passing game too. Because you look at the Jets wide receivers outside of Garrett Wilson, there's not a lot to be desired, but also Breece Hall can help you out in that way too as well. And then it'll be instances where you'll see him and Braylon Allen on the field at the same time.
Shout is quickly here brought to you by Amtrak. Amtrak's Empire Service offers frequent departures daily from Niagara Falls, Buffalo, all the way to New York City. So this is the time. If you're going from Buffalo to the game down in New Jersey, head over to Amtrak.com. No middle seats, plenty of legroom. You don't have to get to the airport 2 hours before your departure. Riding Amtrak is an experience, a fun and relaxing way to get to your destination. And we're also brought to you by Tops Friendly Markets. Right now, it's the rush to the red zone. Win the GOAT, the greatest of all tailgates, in the Tops Red Zone raffle. Shop from over 25 fan favorites. You'll be entered to win the GOAT, an ultimate tailgate package that includes a Samsung outdoor TV, Traeger grill, Oni pizza oven, Igloo Cool Tunes cooler, and a $500 chef experience, and so much more. All right, Antwan, let's flip things over to the defensive side of the ball here for the New York Jets. Up front, it feels like year over year, incrementally, Will McDonald is taking steps. And obviously the 2 sacks, you immediately raise him to the top of the conversation list when you're talking about this Jets defense.
Yeah.
But how important has his development been? Because this isn't the same defensive line the Jets have had depth-wise the last couple of years. Some of the names that are, I think about Franklin Myers, who's not there anymore. Some of the past, they had big thoughts for Hassan Reddick. That obviously didn't materialize. But how important is Will McDonald to what they do up front?
It's huge because I think now, especially when you have Jermaine Johnson coming off an Achilles injury. So obviously, I think when the conventional wisdom tells you that it's going to take Jermaine some time to kind of get his feet back there. He missed basically all of last year. Like he ended up suffering that Achilles injury week 2 against the Titans. So he's trying to get back in football form. I thought he looked pretty decent there against the Steelers, but I think Will McDonald, in addition to Quentin Williams, who was also active, is going to be huge for that defensive line there. Because oftentimes, as you know, especially when the Bills would play the Jets, they would double and triple team Quentin Williams like regularly because he commanded that much attention. He's been an All-Pro, Pro Bowl player for a reason, and now you can't do that when you have a guy that recorded 10.5 sacks last year like Will McDonald has had. And I think now he's bigger, he's faster than what he once was. They want him to be more of a presence in the run game as opposed to just being a third down pass specialist there. They want him to be a 3-down player, and I think he's starting to come into that form there. And also think, adding a guy like Harrison Phillips, as Bills fans may remember, could be a really presence in the run game too as well. And I think they feel like they needed to shore that up too, and that also takes some pressure off of Quentin Williams too as well. So I like their D-line room. As you alluded to, it's not as deep as it once was with the Robert Saleh era, where they changed. They rotated so many defensive linemen out back then, but their front four and they're very top heavy. I think they could pose problems for a lot of opposing teams.
What's the history between Steve Wilks and Aaron Glenn? Like, did they go back? Were they on a staff together at any point? Is Wilks running what Glenn ran in Detroit? I'm curious about like that kind of meshing point.
That's a good question, actually. No, they've never worked together, but they've known each other from afar. And, basically, Aaron Glenn wanted somebody that had prior head coaching experience on the staff. Obviously, with Wilks, having that 1 year with the Cardinals there and, being the interim coach of the Panthers a few years ago, too, he can kind of bounce things off of him. And, as far as the defense, it's kind of a mix of both. Aaron Glenn is a more man-to-man, type of pressure defensive coach there, where Steve Wilks is more of a zone, type of, coach too as well. And I think their offenses are really a blend of each other. I think the difference that I think Bills fans are going to see on Sunday is the Jets are running, more man-to-man coverage and they're blitzing more. And I think you definitely didn't see that under Robert Saleh, where they would just rely on their front four to get pressure on a regular basis. Now they're sending Jamie Sherwood, they're sending Quincy Williams. Sometimes they may send, defensive backs. It just depends on what they, feeling at the time. And I think that's very reminiscent of the defense that Aaron Glenn had of the Lions. So it's really a mixture of both. But they definitely want to, get pressure on the quarterback as much as possible. They're not just going to rely on their front four. If they want to send, five guys at the quarterback like they did Aaron Rodgers, they're going to do that, especially a guy like Aaron Rodgers, which has lost a little bit of his speed as he ages.
So many fun matchups in this one. I mean, we're talking about in a lot of ways, it feels like the coming out party for Keon Coleman on national TV to
Yeah,
go for 112 and a touchdown. Obviously, I don't know if there's necessarily like Nate Wiggins is a good player, but it's leveling up quite a bit to go up against Sauce Gardner this week. And he's coming off of an exemplary performance in week one. Um, the question I had isn't much about Sauce and the potential about facing Keon Coleman. It's more so on the other side, because I feel like Brandon Stevens, the Bills have gone up against him in the past. It's been a problem. Is that an area where you saw last week? I think I saw one maybe dropped interception where it looked like it was right in his hands and he could have picked
yes.
it off, but also just kind of struggling a little bit in coverage. Does that still seem to kind of be a narrative around him?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's kind of the same issues he had with the Ravens, where it's like he's failing to turn his head around in time and get in position there. And, he's late. And when you're late in position, especially as a DB, then a lot of the times you're going to get beat. So it was one instance where, really, if you go back to the end of the game, it was an instance where, I forgot there's that receiver of the Steelers, but he held his arm and it probably should have been PI.
Calvin Austin, right? Was
Yeah,
that
yeah,
the
that's what it
he
was. Yeah.
wanted to call? Yeah.
Exactly. Like it probably should have been PI. So the 60 yards field goal probably shouldn't have, never came about anyway, but they didn't get the call. And then he was called for another pass interference before that too. I say all that to say is like, it's going to be interesting to see what the Jets do this week, because they had, Sauce traveling with DK the entire time, but Aaron Glenn is also stressed that it's also going to depend on matchups. So in this instance, Keon Coleman is a emerging star. Do you want Sauce shadowing him the entire time, or do you just want him to play one specific certain side? That's going to be something they're going to have to wrestle with there, because Brandon Stevens has really struggled there with the same issues that he continues to have, and Michael Carter the second also didn't play particularly well, and it's a big questions with the Jets safeties too. So I think if that continues to be the case, then I think I can see a lot of teams just saying, you know what, Sauce, you got it. Like, you want to lock down that side? Okay, cool. We're gonna go ahead. We're gonna beat you like all across the rest of the field. So yeah, I think the Jets really have to come to grips with that. It's, play that have Sauce travel from time to time, but probably don't do it exclusively each game. It's just going to depend on the type of receivers that you face up with.
Later in the week, I'm going to go back and look at the games last season to see how much the Bills relied on heavy personnel against this team, because you think like if Carter's struggling, maybe the Jets would welcome that to get an extra linebacker on the field, play a little bit more heavy, try to go up against the run. You mentioned Harrison Phillips, Quinn Williams in the middle, really tough combo there. But I think the Bills are going to try to run the ball. They weren't super successful, I thought, compared to what they did in the playoffs against Baltimore 9 months ago in the rematch in week one, but they're a run first team. They're kind of experimenting a little bit with the 13 personnel. We saw them throw that out there a couple of times in the game. And Jackson Hall, they're really excited about this young blocking tight end who goes out and makes a 29-yard catch, right? I mean, so we saw that in the summer. Like, he was making catches. I thought his hands were really reliable, which now it gives you more of that Baltimore Ravens style 13 personnel where all three of your tight ends, you can have them out there, and two of them are real good blockers, but they can all also catch the ball.
Yeah, I don't know why more teams don't do that. The Jets are also, experimented there a little bit, 12 and 13 personnel too as well, where they have Mason Taylor on the field. They also have, Smart too. They got over from the Chargers, and along with Jeremy Rucker. So it'll be packages where they use that too, especially consider if you want to be a physical team. I think that's the best way to do it, and especially when you have guys that are willing blockers too, and also it gives you some matchup nightmares too as well if you can have got tight ends like that who can make tremendous catches near the goal line. So yeah, it's a great problem to have, especially if you're Buffalo. And Dalton Kincaid, I definitely think he started to look a little bit, but he looked like the guy I saw at Utah, where I think a lot of times where he was that first round pick, and I felt like he was the best tight end in that particular draft. And if he can continue to play like that, the Bills are definitely going to be tough out anyway with Josh Allen, but it gives you more to worry about on the offensive end.
I was going to ask you about, like, Freiermuth had a good game. I felt like at the second level, especially, I mean, they've spammed the play action, right? Like, that's something that Arthur Smith offenses want to do. But on a couple of those plays, I felt like even as you if you don't get pressure on Aaron Rodgers and he can kind of wait and find a seam, he found a couple openings in the second level. Is that an area where you're placing most of the responsibility on the safeties or the scheme? And that's why I kind of asked at the beginning, is there still kind of getting up to speed on this Wilkes defense? Because it's interesting. He's from that Carolina tree that plays predominantly zone, obviously Sean McDermott's defense as well. And that almost feels like it's two ideologies coming together to create one new thing, which could sometimes take a little while.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of my biggest complaints too about the Jets defense on Sunday was because they showed a lot of blitz. Like when you show Aaron Rodgers blitz, like I don't care how old he could probably be 70 years old. He'll still know how to beat it. He might not be able to beat it, but he'll know like where to throw and how to check it down and things like that. So yeah, you have to be really careful with these smart quarterbacks letting them know where the pressure is coming from. And I feel like the Jets didn't do a good job for that. As far as like the second level, Tony Adams has been a bit of a liability there. They end up signing Andre Cisco to a deal, and they feel like he can really come of age there. But he's had his struggles, whether it be the preseason or also on that second level too. And you mentioned Firemouth, but I also thought Jonnu Smith also had a really good game too. Ended up having a touchdown pass too as well. So yeah, I think the tight ends were a bit factor there for Pittsburgh too, and they obviously utilize three of them there. Something that the Bills are gonna try to do too as well. So yeah, they have to be able to disguise the blitz there a little bit better. I feel like they didn't do a good enough job in that area on Sunday. We'll see how they all plays out against the Bills. But yeah, I think, the safeties have to play a lot better. I think the secondary as a whole has to play a lot better outside of Sauce Gardner.
You mentioned Jonnu Smith. Luckily, I have him sitting on my bench with George Kittle expected to be out the next couple of weeks in fantasy football.
So
I'm good. I'm looking forward to what Jonnu Smith's going to be. Obviously, Arthur Smith is a big fan. You look at this matchup, let's zoom out to 30,000 foot view here to close it down. What do you think is what gives the thought that the Jets could maybe compete in this game? And where do you feel like the Bills could maybe exploit the Jets to where maybe it couldn't be a good day for them?
Well, I mean, as you know, like for whatever reason, the Jets and Bills always play these crazy close games at MetLife Stadium. So, it seems like it's a bit of a slugfest there. Obviously, the Jets defense will need to improve there. But, I think trying to get pressure on Josh Allen, try to force him to make mistakes. Although I think Josh Allen is a much different player than even what he was like a year ago. Because I feel like he's just so much more smarter and efficient. And he won't turn the ball over like how he has he done in the past against the Jets too. So yeah, I think you need to be able to just contain him in the pocket there. Hopefully maybe you get some drops from the receivers there. Also, be able to contain the run game with James Cook and be able to get pressure that way too. So I think from a defense perspective, like yeah, you have to. That's kind of what you have to do offensively. Justin Fields needs to continue to be the guy that he is. Be able to use his legs there. Be efficient. Don't turn the football over there. Rely on your running game, not just Breece Hall, but also Braylon Allen too, Isaiah Davis there. Maybe try to rush if you can rush for 182 yards like they did against the Steelers, more often than not, I think you're going to be in just about every game, this season. So if you can do that, I think they also need to, and I think this is going to become a problem later on, and I touched on it earlier, they need to have another weapon outside of Garrett Wilson. I mean, 7 catches, had a tremendous day, but it's going to be teams are going to start to key on him. Like they're going to start double and triple teaming. So guys like, Tyler Johnson, Josh Reynolds, Mason Taylor are also going to have to step up in that passing game and help Justin Fields, who, again, like we haven't seen him on a consistent basis, be able to throw the football like that. But, I think Tanner Edstrand has done a really good job of just, utilizing his talents and, creating a game plan where, he could be successful. But yeah, if you can do that, just keep the efficiency. Don't turn the football over and commit penalties, something the Jets have, done the last couple of years. They led the league in penalties. Then I think they have a shot, in this game. I like Buffalo to win just because I think they're the better team, but it would not surprise me if the Jets were to keep this close to, because like, I think they're going to rely heavily on that run game, just kind of, slow the game down as much as possible and keep the game out of Josh Allen's hands.
I think it has a chance to be really low scoring early until maybe the teams maybe open it up in the second half, like almost not wanting to make mistakes because, if you're the Jets, young quarterback, a new look team, you want to make sure that you do come out here and to only stay in the game against this team. They don't turn the ball over. I mean, they only had 8 turnovers as an organization in 2024. They didn't turn one over week 1 against Baltimore. I think that's going to be the big piece of this as well. I also think from the Bill side, how do Cole Bishop and Taylor Rapp respond from playing collectively one of the worst games I've seen a safety duo play in Buffalo since I started covering the team? And, I think there were question marks around Cole Bishop, but I thought Taylor Rapp's play in week 1 was just as concerning,
Yeah.
taking angles on runs, being out of position in coverage on some really big Zay Flowers. I mean, if I'm Garrett Wilson watching the tape from week 1 and seeing Zay Flowers eat, I'm like, let's go, let's suit up, let's get out there, let me test things. I think Christian Benford, who was actually the guy that was they had him for the 2 touchdowns in the game. I think he's going to come out and play with a level of competitiveness to want to maybe trail or shadow Garrett Wilson throughout the game. There's so many little like intricate matchups in this game of 2 teams that know each other well, but at the same time, a completely new layer with Aaron Glenn, the new coaching staff, and some new pieces.
Yeah, it's also a sense of urgency for the Jets too, because again, they have difficult early schedule too. So yeah, you really don't want to go down 0-2, like, and then you're at Tampa, you're in Florida the next 2 weeks, you're at Tampa, and then you're at Miami, and then you come back home against Dallas before you go to London against the Broncos. So yeah, it's definitely not an easy schedule at all. I guess I expected it to be a slugfest, but then again, I thought the Steelers Jets would be a slugfest too, and it ended up being one of the second most exciting game of Sunday, and with a lot of points scored. I never would have thought the Jets would score 32 points there. They only did it one time last year under Aaron Rodgers when he was starting, and Justin Fields' first start ended up putting up 32 in a losing effort against the Steelers. But yeah, I think they definitely have to take the ball out of Josh Allen's hand as much as possible, because he's a killer, like, and they know it too. And I'm curious to see, like, I'm actually going to go back and look at Aaron Glenn and his game against the Bills a few years ago when he was the coordinator of the Lions, and kind of see how they attacked them there, just to kind of get a sense of what him and Steve Wilkes might decide to do on plans to go after Allen. But he's a much different quarterback than what he was even then. So I'm curious to get his thoughts there when we get in the building on Wednesday.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up, because last year's game, you almost have to throw that out, because I don't think the Lions had any healthy players on defense. Like,
well, that too.
It was a shootout, but I think it would have been a little bit of a different game had they been a little bit healthier. Let me ask you this before I get you out of here. Patriots and Dolphins match up this weekend. You've obviously covered many teams in the AFC East here over the last couple of years. I think we all kind of expected the Dolphins to not be very good, but even that performance surprised me to a degree. How did things shift in terms of your expectations for hierarchy in the AFC East going into the season, and how did it change coming off of that opening weekend?
I think it gave, as far as the Jets, I'm like, okay, maybe they can win more games tonight. I had to win in 6, so I was like, maybe they can win more than 6 games potentially, especially considering their schedule in this back half. New England, I knew it was going to be probably some bumps in the road there. I also think the Raiders are really a better team than I think a lot of people expect, especially with Geno Smith and Pete Carroll. There's a much better, well coached team, so I can see them, being in the playoff race the entire year. So yeah, the Patriots Dolphins game is going to be key too, because yeah, you definitely don't want to go 0-2 in that division either. So in that sense either. So yeah, I mean, as far as the Dolphins, it's a bit of a they have the worst secondary in the league. Like, it's not even close. Like,
Right.
how they that's how they're operating. They're expecting to, I guess they want to get a lot of pressure on the quarterback with their front four. But if your secondary is, the way that it is, like, and I'm trying to be as nice as possible, it's going to be difficult. And then you're not getting adequate quarterback play from Tua, who ended up turning the ball over 3 times dead. And, offensive line is not great either. And now they having injuries that are coming about there. It seems like, McDaniel doesn't necessarily have a lot of answers. I got criticized by Dolphin fans by saying this in the offseason. I thought the Dolphins and the Jets could be fairly similar in record wise, like very 6-7 wins, because I just feel like everything's gonna collapse, fall apart from the Dolphins, and I think you kind of saw that last year, especially with the Tyreek Hill situation where he quit the last game of the year against the Jets, and you allow that player to come back into your locker room, and what does that say to the rest of your locker room? And you're trying to build a program. I don't think that's a positive step in the direction, especially if you're trying to get men to fight for you, and trying to lead men on a weekly basis or a day-to-day basis for that matter. So yeah, I just think it's a bit of a disaster, and I'm curious to see like how long Stephen Ross and the Dolphins organization continues to, if they go on this big time losing streak, will they make a move there? Because I've covered two Dolphins teams where, well, a few more than few Dolphins teams that Tony Sperano. I was there when Tony Sperano got fired mid-season. That was my first year covering the Dolphins. Joe Philbin 10 years ago, crazy enough, they ended up losing to the Jets in London. We get back and then they fired him 2 days later. So Stephen Ross has showed, he will fire a coach in mid-season. So if things do not get better, then, I expect they make some kind of move there.
Antwan Staley giving us the goods here on a Tuesday, week 2 in the NFL, Bills versus Jets in Jersey this weekend on Sunday. Let everybody know where they can find you, what you got going on this week.
Just find me at Antwan Staley. All social media platforms, including X, Twitter. Also find my work at nydailynews.com. And as you alluded to, like as I said earlier, we'll be breaking down kind of going back and look at what Aaron Glenn and the Lions did, against Josh Allen last time they played each other, and just kind of looking at the matchup as a whole. Because I think especially considering how Sauce Gardner and the way he played, we're definitely gonna tap in a little bit on that too, especially considering Keon Coleman had a really good game, and I'm curious to see how he plays on Sunday too, because I'm a big Keon Coleman fan. I told you that when he was coming out, and I really think he's going to do wonders for him, and I think you're starting to see that now.
Great stuff, my man. I'll see you this Sunday in the press box.
Yes, sir. I can't wait.